About me. My name is Les Campbell. I was born in a small town in the Snake River Valley in Idaho called Shelley. In the 19 years I spent there, it was the center of the universe, and we always accept the fact that Shelley was the potato capital of the world. I was born into a family that we eventually would have 11 children. My mother graduated from high school and had some advanced training in bookkeeping and shorthand. My father finished the 8th grade and spent the rest of his life doing what he could find on farms. He was a sheep herder, worked for farmers, truck driver, ditch rider, and we struggled, and we all worked very, very hard. When I was 19, I went on a 2-year mission for the LDS Church to what was then called Western Canada. I spent 2 years in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and British Columbia. After I came home, I moved to Southern California and stayed with my brother, got some jobs, and started to go to school. At that time my interest was geology, but I would change that a couple of years later. But I went to school there for 2 years. The second year I was there, I was invited by my church to teach a seminary class, which started at 6 o'clock in the morning. And I had 42 students. And I'd get up, go to seminary, teach the Old Testament, and little did I know it at the time, but this was going to become my career for the next almost 40 years. In seminary, one year we would teach Old Testament, the next year we would teach New Testament, the following year we would teach Book of Mormon, and you will hear me quote from that book, and I'll explain why later on in the videos. And then the last year, by the time the students would graduate, we would teach church history, and then Doctrine and Covenants and the Pearl of Great Price, which I will explain as we move along. So I was there for 2 years in San Bernardino Valley Junior College, and then transferred on a scholarship to Brigham Young University in Provo, Utah. And there I switched my major emphasis of study from geology to geography, and graduated with a Bachelor's of Science, and 2 years later I was awarded a Master of Science in Geography. But my true love was teaching the gospel of Jesus Christ to young people. And I was offered a full-time, well, it was part-time to start with, and then it became a full-time employment in 1969. I went on contract with the church to be a seminary teacher. Now, at this point, I want to stop and talk for just a minute about my approach here. I'm going to try and be casual. That camera that I'm looking at does not scare me a bit. And so I want to be relaxed. You will very seldom see me in a white shirt and tie. So I'm going to take off my tie right now and start my comfort zone. Now I've done that. I feel better. For 38 years I was required to wear white shirts and ties to work. Okay, so now we move on into my career as a seminary teacher. As a teenager growing up, but I had always wanted to live amongst the Polynesian people down in the Pacific. Tonga, Hawaii, Samoa, New Zealand, Cook Islands. I just had read stories and heard people's experiences down there, and I thought it would be a great experience. So I always wanted to go down because the church has schools down there in those islands, and if they can't find teachers, local teachers, to teach subjects, then they invite the American teachers to come down. So in 1977, there was an opportunity that came to my family. By this time I'm married. I married Linda Norton from Burley, Idaho, and at the time we had 3 children. 2 came to us after our return from the islands. And this is where my interest in the near-death experience really started, as I'll share in a minute. So we went to Tonga to teach at a church school called Liahona High School. And we started in January of 1978, and we were to be there for 2 years with the possible extension of a 3rd year. And we just, you know, thought, whoa, what a great way to be together, raise our kids, give them the experience, the water, the whole business that we think about when we think about Polynesia and the islands. Well, so we went, and we were there for a year with Aaron, my oldest son, who is 8, and Laura, 2 years younger, and Holly Ann. She had her 4th birthday on the 21st of December. And this is where the near-death experiences become a permanent part of my life. On December the 21st, 1978, it was Holly's birthday, so we took her into town and we got a hamburger at John's Place and just spoiled her rotten, had a great time. 3 days later, she was in a coma. Christmas morning, Christmas Eve, I stayed up all night. She had a fever of 104. And the hospital was 11 miles away, and we didn't have a car. There was only one car on campus, and it was being used. And so I stayed up all night, soaking her body in wet towels and giving her some blessings, prayers. Christmas morning, she didn't want to open her Christmas presents and went into fever, convulsions, and a coma on Christmas Day. 3 days later, she had gone blind in one eye. She was paralyzed on one side of her body. And we became very frightened because here we are on this little Tongan island out in the Pacific, and the medical facilities just could not take care of her needs. They didn't even know what was wrong with her. So my wife, having just given birth in American Samoa to our son Spencer, couldn't very well travel, so I went with Holly and a nurse from Nuku'alofa over to Auckland to get better medical treatment. We ended up being there for 6 weeks, and she had heart surgery, she had brain surgery, the paralysis and the blindness never left, and it was decided after the inside of her brain collapsed. We didn't know it, but she had a staph infection. It had gotten into the blood system, had gotten into the heart and into the brain. The doctors told me that I should find a mortician because she wouldn't live beyond the day. And I had a little bit more faith in my God than I did in the doctors, so they were very good people. They have a rock-solid place in the heart of the Campbells, the doctors and the nurses that cared for us while we were there. So I bargained with the doctors, and they convinced me that she was going to die. My wife had already moved back to our home in the States with all of our furniture and whatever we had taken with the 3 kids. And I stayed in New Zealand and was to follow later. She had actually started to recover. But she spent much of that 6-week period in a coma. She'd come in, she'd go out, come in and go out. And the doctors agreed that if she was alive, this happened on a Sunday night, that if she was alive on Monday night, that they would sign the papers and help me get her back to her family in the States. And she was alive. And I believe God had a hand in that. But they would not let us leave without a registered nurse. So we made arrangements for Coral, was her name, to get on the plane and accompany my daughter, 4 years old, and myself back to Hawaii, back to Los Angeles, and back to Salt Lake City. Well, it was on that flight. I had heard a little bit about Raymond Moody, but it was on that flight that both Coral and I read the entire book. This is the book that started me on the path to where I am at this time talking to you. And honestly, I thought about Holly and where her spirit was, but there was no communication to speak of. So Holly came home in a coma. We arrived on Thursday, and she passed away Saturday morning, but had the opportunity to be in the presence of her grandparents and some dear friends. So I went back to the classroom and teaching seminary, and over the years it started as a curiosity, this near-death thing. But later in my teaching career, it became not just a curiosity, but a passion, and then an addiction. And now, over the last 3 years, I have developed a sense of a mission. That there are some things involved with the near-death experiences. I shouldn't call them things, they're events, experiences that people had. And the last 3 years, I have read over 100 books, professional journals, the IONS newsletter. I haven't read them all yet. And the library is over my right shoulder. But as I began to read, I'll just show you. I don't know how well you're going to be able to see this, but Um, I'm the type of guy that reads with a pencil or a pen in my hand. Oh, that's upside down. See, don't, just ignore those things. I'm a human being. I am who I am, and you are who you are. If I make mistakes, don't email and say, Campbell, you made a mistake. I'll be aware of my mistakes. But if you have questions, that's a different story. So, what started to happen is I would read one book and I would make notes in the margins, and this is now going to get into what I would call the process. But I want to look at my notes, so you just give me a second here to make sure that there's nothing that I have skipped that I wanted to say. There's a lot about me that you'll learn as we go through. After reading, maybe 50, maybe 60 books on near-death experiences and the scientific arguments back and forth, which quite frankly I get tired of because it's not of real interest to me, because I already have my bias. And it's more spiritual than it is scientific. But I started to get the idea of writing a book. In defense, if you will, as a testimony of Jesus Christ and His gospel and the plan that Heavenly Father has for us, His children. And so I wrote down the title, Coincidence or Confirmation? And nothing has happened to me in all of my reading to even nudge me in the direction of it being coincidence, near-death experience. Near-death experiences have a purpose. And it's confirmation to me that we have a loving Heavenly Father, God, whatever name you want to give Him, Om, the source, the all that is, there's lots of them, and I'll point them out perhaps as we go through. But He's there. He knows each one of us. He has a plan, a purpose, a pathway. Again, the experiencers of the near-death experience have lots of different names and titles, and I'll try and use them all. But I am most comfortable with a plan, as we'll have a lecture. And that's what I'm calling these. I'll explain later. So, why am I doing this? 2 years ago, it was Thanksgiving Day, and I was over at my brother-in-law's, Don Norton, English professor at BYU, now retired. And we were talking, and he happens to give lectures at an organization called ElderQuest. Now, ElderQuest here in Utah is an organization for older people who are retired, who want to just keep learning about things. And so this ElderQuest organization has about 17 different teachers. It's sponsored by Utah Valley University. And throughout a given week during their teaching semester, they may have as many as 17 different lecturers. And so my brother-in-law said, Les, you know enough about near-death experiences, you ought to lecture. They won't pay you. I said, well, that's okay. I wouldn't do it for money. I would do it for sharing the knowledge of God and Christ and their plan as is revealed through the near-death experience. And if you'll stay with me, I have dozens and dozens, literally, of lectures that, and this video is part of a preparation for those lectures. And he said, well, can I give your name to the ElderQuest director? And I said, well, yeah, sure, but they probably won't be interested. I mean, old people don't want to hear about death. Well, much to my surprise, they called me on the phone and said, Mr. Campbell, we'd like you to start in January. We go 10 lectures, and then we break, and then we have 10 more in the fall, starting in September. Do you think you have enough information to do 10 lectures? I just chuckled on the phone and I said, I have enough information to do 50 lectures, each one on a separate topic. Well, I hadn't put them all together, but I knew what I had in my margins in my books that I've been writing for a couple of years. And so come January the 28th, 2013, I started my first lecture series through the education arm of ElderQuest. That September, I gave 10 more. This year, I gave 10 more, starting in January and going through April, taking Mondays off for vacations and holidays. I will start my 4th semester in September, and I've outlined, and I'm now going through the process, and I'll show you the process. Another 30 to 40, maybe 50 or 60, I don't know. I haven't gotten that far yet. So, that's where I'm at. Why am I doing this? First lecture I gave, there were 50 people in the room. And I just out of curiosity, I'm not out to write a book and get your story, your near-death story. I'm not interested in that. And I told them, I says, just curiosity, in a group of 50, how many of you have had near-death experiences, or you know someone personally that has? 25 hands went up, and I was in shock. I couldn't believe it. I've read the statistics in all of the books that, you know, they now project. I saw one the other day, 15 million people. Started out as 8, then jumped to 12, and then 13, but now they estimate 15 million people in this country alone have had near-death experiences. And obviously most of them have never shared them for a variety of reasons. But after that first lecture, a woman came up to me afterwards, and she kind of stood back off. People were coming up and shaking my hand and thanking me and say, oh man, I've always wondered about that. I'm so glad you shared this. Yada, yada, yada. She came up and she was in tears. And she says, I've been struggling with this for many, many years. My husband's passed away, and you've answered the question. And that happens almost every single Monday I go and present what I have read. Quite frankly, my desire is to help people overcome their fears, their concerns, to develop a vision for the future beyond the veil, to have some hope, and to make some changes in their life so they're better prepared for their life review. It's happened to me after I've read many books, especially Danny and Brinkley's 3 books. Joyce Brown. There's just, I'll get into this in my next segment. So that's me. I'm doing this to help change lives. If I can change one life, it would be a significant thing in my life. And so I hope that you will stay with exploringneardeathexperiences.com and Les Campbell. And we've set it up so we can communicate back and forth. I don't know how much of that will happen. But that's a little bit about me. Let's see if I've missed anything. A couple of things. In Timothy, and I was going to get the reference, but I'll get it for you. In Timothy, I think it's chapter 3, 2 Timothy, he makes the comment that there are some who are ever learning but never ever coming to a knowledge of the truth. And I feel that's kind of the way it is with the near-death experience. We've got scientists doing all kinds of studies, and I know they have to do it, and I support them in that, but that's not where my interest is. My interest is in coming to the truth from a spiritual viewpoint. Okay? So, I'm going to lean back now, and I've already shown you upside down what my margins of my books, and almost every book I have has marginal notes, but they're not scientific. So this is the process. Let me just pause for a second, and I'm going to keep it running, but this is a signal for my webmaster that I'm going to stop for just a second, rearrange my books. So, I'm back. I gotta, this is the agreement. I gotta put up my green card. That means go. So I'm back. I have in my lap 5 8.5 by 11 spiral notebooks. Now mind you, I didn't start out with the intent really to write a book or to do a video or to go on YouTube or to lecture at ElderQuest. I'm a professional teacher. I've taught for 38 years. Still teaching as a volunteer. Have for the last 6 years. So this is just my curiosity and addiction. So here's how it all started out. I don't expect you to read that. But I have 5 books, each with the alphabetical letter. And a comment, and then I've abbreviated every book that I have. So I could write it all on one line. Okay? So just to give you an idea, I've got here love, light, language, life review, life preview, learning. That's just on this page. Then I've got the reference to the book and the page number. And I have done that religiously for the last 2 years, and I have filled up 5 of these. Okay? So that was the process. So I have the page number. I can go to my books. I'm not going to switch the camera, but to my left I've got 3 stacks of books, which we will be our first lecture topics. And I could show you those, but it's not necessary until I read them to you. All right, so now I'm getting organized to do lectures, and I'm going to my books, my notebooks, where I have the topics written down, and it might be of interest to you that I have over 700 topics from the books that I've read. Now that's a little bit different than the scientists and some of the researchers. But my intent was to collect everything I could that described what went on the other side of the veil from these near-death experiences. And as we get into these topics, I'll share more with you. So now I have these 5 books, and I'm struggling. People in my class say, "Oh, Les, you ought to write a book. Les, you ought to go on YouTube." And it just wasn't the right time. I was worried about copyright. Well, you're not making any money. No, I'm not. It's education. Yes, it is. Absolutely. ElderQuest is an educational arm supported by university, Utah Valley University. And about 6 months ago, I started to feel the mission aspect of what I shared with you. I just felt now I'm beyond the passion, I'm beyond the addiction. Well, that's not true either, because I'm still addicted. And I have to have a fix. I have to read a new book every couple of weeks, or, you know, I'm only joking. But I love in expanding the horizons of what I've already read and pushing them back. And so from that, I get a really thick free ring binder, and I start another process. And I started to pick topics that I thought would be appreciated on YouTube. And I have a webmaster, and he's helped me. And so for the last 3 weeks, I've been spending hours and hours and hours going through these 5 books and putting them according to topics. Now, I mentioned I had 700. Those are going to, of course, be combined, reduced, or eliminated as I go through the process, but there will be 300 or 400 probably different topics. So my first lecture is going to be on leaving the body. And I'm not going to lecture because I'm not qualified. I'm a seminary teacher. I know the standard works. Old, New Testament, Book of Mormon, Doctrine and Covenants, and Pearl River Price. I'm not into all of the scientific experiments and all their graphs and etc., etc. What I'm in, again, and I'm repeating this, is I'm into what can we find in our exploration that tells us what happens on the other side of the veil. Do they drink? Do they eat food? Are there animals? What about abortion? What about miscarriage? Can you communicate with fish? Are there boats? The answer is yes. Can you walk in the bottom of the ocean without breathing? The answer is yes. Can you go up and hug a tree and have the tree spiritually hug you back? Yes. And birds? Can you travel through space? Do you have to go to your own funeral? No. How do we communicate? Are you ever allowed to come back to the earth? Yes. But it's not whimsical. There has to be a purpose, and there has to be some direction. Are there churches there? Yes. Are there religions there? Yes. But the religions seem to take a back seat to spirituality. Do people go to hell there? Yes. Do people go to heaven there? Yes. And so you start putting 10 or 15 of these different experiences on the topic of, let's say, libraries in the spirit world. And you get a fairly good picture about books and libraries that exist in the spirit world and how people read them. A library the size of Washington, D.C., the city of Washington, D.C. That's got a few books in it. And so we will go through and as I gather this, collate it into a topic, I'll get enough for 15, 20 minutes and sit down in front of the camera and I'll share it. Now it's going to be, hit and miss until I find out how this is going to go. And if it works, it works. If it doesn't, I'm not out anything. Now, just a second, let me adjust something here on the camera. That's it. Okay. So some ideas. Continuing on about the process. When I originally started to think about writing a book, I sent out 50 copyright permission letters and got many, many of them back. And they wanted to know how many copies, who's your editor, who's your publisher, and a whole bunch of questions that I wasn't prepared to answer. And I'm still not, totally, but I'm moving in that direction. My idea, if a genie were here and came out of a bottle and said, Les, I'll give you one wish, what do you want? And I would say, I would like to have all of the near-death experience people get together and share their experiences. No researchers, no scientists, no what I call the meat grinder procedure. And here again, I know it's necessary, but you take a pound of beef and you grind it up, and these scientists and researchers take this little piece and they look at it and they analyze it and they take that little piece, and boy, there's an awful lot of beef left. And it's, personally, I think, it's not a judgment, it's just an opinion, they're not qualified to delve into and prove spiritual things. I think that comes from the Holy Ghost. I think that comes from our Father in heaven, and I think that comes from the Savior. And so I would like to have all of the books, no copyrights, just forget copyright, forget the money. Let's not do it for money. Let's just do it for the love of preparing people to die without fear and with hope. would love to see a series of books, small ones on individual topics. But I doubt that IANDS or anybody else will grab onto that. They put their information on CDs and anyway. So that would be my dream. A couple of other things. A copyright note. I am not making any money on this. I have purchased every book behind me with my own money. I prepare lectures with my own money and especially time. This will be my procedure. I will hold up a book, probably have to bring it in. This is Betty Eadie's Embraced by the Light. I will hold up a book. I will turn to a quote that has to do with the topic. The first topic is passing through, crossing over, going to the other side. There's all kinds of different ways people say leaving the body, and that's the one I've kind of picked, is if we're going to have a near-death experience, it seems to me we ought to leave the body. And so I am giving acknowledgement to the author, and then most of all, I think, is that my webmaster has connected every single book but one to Amazon. If you're interested in purchasing a book that I use, you've already got the book's name, you've already got the author, you can link to Amazon and pull it up right there. Every book I use is there. Now there of course may come in the future a time when it's not there, when I get a new one and it's not there, but I have a hard time understanding that that would ever happen. So that's kind of the process. I have here to my left 3 stacks of books, and I've read them just recently, and I know how many lines, quote unquote, it takes to make a minute and 2 minutes, and I've talked to other people who have done this, and they said, Les, keep your lectures to 15 to 20 minutes. Now I know this introductory one is going to go beyond that, but hopefully none of the others will go beyond 20 minutes. An hour is too long. Most people have a difficult time finding an hour to sit down and watch some old geezer blab about near death. 15 to 20 minutes we can keep your attention, and it's good for me too. It helps me. If I had to stack up all my quote books for an hour and 15 minutes, that wouldn't be a good thing for me or you. So that's the plan. And I will say this openly, full disclosure, to those who want me to get permission. This is start of the refining process of which quotes that I'm going to want. If being connected to Amazon and knowing that I'm not making any money and I'm giving full credit and citations, if that still is a problem for some, then please email me and I will quit using your book until I get permission. I may paraphrase from it, but I will not quote. Because truthfully, there is a recording being made, and it'll be on YouTube. And so if that bothers someone, please let me know and I'll stop using that book to quote from. Okay, so I think that's about all that I wanted to say. So I'm going to hold up my little pink card. The next session will be, it'll consist of 3, and it will be leaving the body and crossing through the veil into the spirit world. And I have about 40 to 45 minutes on that subject. And from there, I haven't got my tunnel one yet, but a lot of people talk about tunnels, so that'll be coming up. But one of my favorite is the life review, and we'll spend an hour or 2 just reading quotes of people's experiences with their life review. No analysis from scientists or researchers, none whatsoever. Thank you. My website gives you a place to ask questions, and I'm not pretending to have all the answers. My motto in my class at Elder Quest is, I read, I share, you decide. And so that's kind of where we're going to go with life review, and then we'll see how it goes, see what kind of response I get. If there's enough interest, we'll go on and talk about God's plan for the universe, God's plan for this earth, and God's plan for His children. And He has one for all of us, and we all at one time knew what it was. So that's kind of the direction I'm heading, and there's lots and lots to come after that. I'd appreciate your suggestions. Keep your snide remarks to yourself, because I probably won't respond. I'm not interested in contention or arguing or proving anything. I'm interested in sharing what I've read and bringing hope and peace into the hearts of those who care to listen and view.